Welcome back to Why Should We Care About African Data Centers, a podcast where we tackle the big questions shaping the industry. I'm your host, Ville Wacklin, and our guest today is Chris George. Chris is one of the most respected professionals in the world of digital infrastructure. He started in the sector as a hands-on engineer more than 30 years ago and worked his way up to master all aspects of the business. He's worked across the globe with big companies such as Google. He's now working as a consultant in his own company called The Self Infrastructure. Chris is also famous in the business for his colorful Hawaii shirts, which seem to become more colorful every time we meet. So today we are trying to make sense of the African digital infrastructure business, what's really happening at the moment, and what we are not understanding as policymakers, developers, and investors, and finally, what should happen to help the industry grow in a sustainable way. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Ville.
So you've had a busy schedule lately. What have you been up to? I heard you were in France.
Yes, I was at the Platform Markets event, which is it's an interesting data center event because unlike the large industry shows like Data Cloud, a lot more people actually attend the sessions there. And you've got experts talking about the future and what's happening. But one of the most fascinating things for me is everybody's been talking about training, these gigawatts and bragawatts, as we're calling them, when they don't actually really exist. And I'm kind of interested about how that works with inference, i.e. using the models and how that interacts with network and edge data centers. And so I think there's a bit of education going on for a lot of, and particularly in the financial community, about how this thing all holds together for the AI world. So it's some very fascinating stuff there. So I understood that NVIDIA and all those big players were present. Did you hear any rumors what's going to happen next? So one of the most interesting ones, and I actually lobbied Platform to get a chip company. So you've got GPUs, and instead of them being called, they come from computer gaming, the graphic processing unit. They're more of actually a generalized tool. And one of the fascinating things there is it's designed to do anything. So perhaps it should be renamed the generalized processing unit. I don't know. But then you've got the inference end, and you can use GPUs for that, but they're very expensive, very high power, and so on. Whereas actually there's language processing units, LPUs, which there's a company called Grok. Actually, interestingly, I think the founder, he was ex-Google and worked on the Tensor, the TPUs that you hear about that Google's selling to people like Meta and things like that. But these are what they do is actually more chips at a lower cost, but they're more specialized, and they can actually do inference in language orientation a lot quicker. Yeah. And but it's the cost is one of the big factors there. And again, one of the interesting things they started talking about was some of the data centers at the edge. I mean, they're air-cooled data centers. They're not liquid-cooled, and it's actually, they were saying they needed an interim design, and they're saying the next platform stage will be an air-cooled solution. But they say in the long term, it will have to be liquid-cooled. But they've got to fit in with what infrastructure's there, because right now, even the hyperscalers, they got more chips than they got space to put them. So everybody's panicking and chasing colo. Now, this is different to Africa, but I think the implications for Africa, it'll be interesting to see if really, I don't think we'll see large language model training at any massive scale. I hope to be corrected in Africa. But inference, you're going to have latency sensitive solutions, which will need to be closer to the data they're working on. I mean, I use the example, like if you've got if you're using AI to generate cat videos or something like that, that's not particularly latency sensitive. So that can be done in a big AI factory up in, the North Pole somewhere, and where power is dirt cheap. And that's why those data centers are there. And then...
so do you think that's a real opportunity, potentially, for African data center players who would like to venture into the AI factory space?
Okay, so the factory space, and there have been attempts at this. I mean, like there was a famous announcement by G42 here in Kenya about putting a gigawatt or something site up in Naivasha. And there's a whole lot associated with ecosystem and perception. And Africa still suffers a lot from perception. You know, the people who live, work here and are invested in the market, they understand the market. But the people making the decisions, they're saying, okay, like in the US, the ease of doing business is so easy to put up a crazy scale data center to get the power sorted and get your permits sorted, and even water in many cases, although ask the people in Arizona about that now. I don't think they thought about it as well. But in Africa, there's this perception about governments, red tape, all of this stuff. And there's a perception about Europe as well on that, the challenge of doing business, the regulatory environment for how can I use that data? And the GPRD and all this stuff. So I think there's possibilities in Africa, but something obviously I'm very known to be associated with. There's also a lot of big connectivity reliability issues in Africa. We could go into that if you like. I mean, there's been quite a lot of challenges recently. So.
It might be one of our topics today. Let's see what we can cover. We have a lot to cover.
Yep.
But thanks for that overview. And I think it's an exciting thing to see if any of those workloads can be outsourced to this continent and what kind of opportunity it brings here and how the data centers here need to be prepared to be able to get some of those opportunities. But before we go to our core topics, I'd like to speak about what we've been doing together here at ITW. So we've been organizing together with AFIDA this catapult accelerator concept, and you've been part of the mentors for the projects that have been pitching here. So any takeaways from what you learned from listening to those pitches from early stage companies in the digital infrastructure space here in Africa?
So, yeah, I mean, we looked at, 6 pitches?
6.
Yes. And I thought some of them were straight bricks and mortar. We see an opportunity for a data center, etc., and it's a business case for that. One of the fascinating things was people understanding about you're a startup, having a solid case about your off-takers. Who's going to buy this stuff? Have you got LOIs? Have you got pre-sales agreements and things like that? And some of the startups, they had really good positioning on pre-sale agreements, but they have to bring that forward and communicate that one, because in the whole financing mix, I built a cable years ago between Australia and America, and it was an off-balance sheet model. And we went round and we had a model and we pre-sold $650 million of capacity for a project that was $1.5 billion. We were putting in equity, but it's really simple because you can almost treat those pre-sales, if they're good credit grade, and so you're blending it down, you're not going to get the equivalent of value of 650 million of equity when you're getting your debt. But it was such that we were able to go to the debt providers, and instead of you saying, right, that equity, you've got a small percentage of equity versus the debt, you actually get a much greater leverage arrangement because of that. And debt is generally cheaper. And if you're in equity, if you're in the business to make money, the equity part is the important part. So.
All right. So anything other technically from the pitching point of view that you realized that was there or was missing?
Well, I think the first thing, they've got to tell people who they are. And again, working with investors, whether they're providing debt or equity, you've got to talk about your track record. Who are you? Because it's personal. And you've got to say, I'm a safe pair of hands. I know what I'm talking about. Or I'm moving into a new sector, but I've got transferable skills or connections or some connection with that. And really then making that part of the story, talking about what the solution is. Now, you can lead with the solution and then straight into it, but it's got to be the first 2 slides.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they don't quite understand. They go, hello, my name is Chris. I'm doing a project about. It's like, not hello, my name is Chris. I used to work at Google. I used to buy the network and infrastructure. I used to design stuff, etc. I have good contacts. And it's saying what you're bringing to the table, because at the end of the day, management of businesses and money is what's going on here. This is what the finance companies are doing. They're looking for safe pair of hands to run this business and make them more money.
Exactly. And a lot of the investors look at the team first, even before they actually look at what they're trying to achieve. So I think that storytelling is hugely important. Okay, 7 topics today, lots to cover. Let's try to kind of tackle one, move to the next one, and so forth. Let's start with the one that's obviously everywhere. Last year, everyone discussed about this from a little bit different perspective than this year, but demand. So how do you see the demand for data centers in Africa and digital infrastructure as a whole evolving across Africa right now?
Well, digital infrastructure demand for it it's growing without a doubt. Some of the big issues, I believe, are still about connectivity. When I was at Google, one of the last things I did was we built a submarine cable called Equiano.
This
goes from Portugal down to South Africa. It stops in Nigeria, Togo, Namibia, and St. Helena, a little island with 4,500 people. But the thing there was I saw a shortening of capacity availability, because a lot of the old the cables had been built like 10 years before.
Yeah.
And they were filling up. And I saw a tightening of capacity on the East Coast. And I said, somebody's got to solve this. And I went around the industry, and actually, as it happened, the quickest way was for us to do it ourselves and then sell fiber pairs onto the market. But then you got To Africa coming, which is still not finished. And everyone thinks it's a competition between, say, Equiano and To Africa, the 2 new big players between Google and Facebook or Meta. But Google's got capacity in To Africa, and Meta's got capacity on Equiano, because you need redundancy, you need reliability.
Of course.
But we've seen the problems, with the Houthis hitting ships at the bottom of the Red Sea. Those ships drop anchor because they're sinking, and they basically are hooking up a bunch of cables. And this happened again last week, and 4 cables got cut, I think. But last year, literally every cable had a different fault caused by a different reason, apart from that Equiano. And that was just, I would say, luck, but Equiano is also an express cable. It's more offshore.
Okay.
So it survives. So you haven't got the human activity hitting it. The West African cables got hit by landslides off Ivory Coast. They've been hit by landslides like 1,000 kilometers out. I think 700 miles out, I think it was,
sure.
off the Congo Canyon, because you've still got currents under the sea from canyons, which erode away at the side. And then you get a landslide, which results in a cable cut. And I think that was the failure mode of those. And we've seen, in the past, many years ago.
How do you calculate that kind of risk in when you build?
Yeah, well, we were thinking about that on Equiano. And actually the routing, part of the reason the routing of the trunk is so far offshore is because of that. And to Africa is also so far offshore. So there's a lot of routing went to Africa by the Meta and the consortium there. But I still think that network infrastructure has to be there to support demand and, access networks and things like that. But then the second thing is for data centers, everybody, South Africa is solid. There's a very healthy market. There's a good enterprise market. Hyperscalers are there with cloud regions. There's rumors of large-scale data centers for single tenants going in there, but it's not happened yet. Cost of power is going up down there. There was a green power story. Obviously, got a lot of sunshine in the Western Cape and a load of wind and things like that. And they've got a nuclear power station there.
Yep. It's still not enough.
But then looking up to, say, Kenya and Nigeria, and for years everyone's going, yes, these are the markets and the hyperscalers are coming and they're going to drop cloud regions. But there's also an interesting point there because from an economics perspective, the currencies are soft currencies. Your revenues are largely, for the cloud players, they'll be selling services locally. Their revenues are going to be in soft currency, whereas their costs are all in hard currency in US dollars. Yeah. And you've got that mismatch there. There's also the access networks, the scale of the enterprise market to go into these things. And as for dropping hyperscaler AI loads, there, I go back to that perception thing. It's changing. It is moving. I get the feeling that some of the people who've got smaller deployments, like an Oracle, can come down and they put down a smaller deployment for their cloud. For example, they're going into Morocco in N+1. There's rumors that they might be coming to Kenya. And
I heard the same rumor.
Yeah, and from that perspective, that's about being nimble, but they've already got software as a service revenues in the markets. So flipping those over to cloud, well, you're just putting the infrastructure in the market, but also looking for government-backed e-digital projects and things like that, where you've got an off-taker. Again, I go back to those pitches, where you've got an off-taker who is going to put their compute and data on your platform, which then drives the data center infrastructure. And sovereign cloud is perhaps one example where people are trying to keep data within the country. And that's stuff like medical records and financial stuff. So, so that's going to drive it. I still think inference, some of the smaller edge locations, that's going to become more and more important for specific use cases. If there's manufacturing, maybe there's a continuous operation process like mining or something like that. There will be those cases where it will be local. But intrinsically, it's increasing the market. We're starting to see GPUs already coming into Kenya. I think TouchNet, they put some GPUs. They're a South African AI cloud company. They put GPUs in IX Africa here in Kenya. I don't really know the scale of it, but it's starting. Yeah. But the big ticket, we're ready. We're here. We're taking 10 megawatts or something like that. That has to happen there. And you look at Angola and Ivory Coast, where they got a ton of hydro, but go back to the perception thing, the connectivity issues and things like that. But they've got, power. I'm getting down towards Finnish prices. I mean, like the Finnish wholesale price, I think that's pretty much the lowest on the planet, isn't it? I think
we're pretty close to that.
A couple of cents, something like that, you can get, I think.
Yeah. Well, is that so? These guys are living in Finland, so we can ask them. What's the price of electricity now?
I have a contract with 8 cents per kilowatt hour.
But that's fixed.
That's fixed.
Are you an industrial scale data center though?
No.
That's true. I guess
Yes,
for individual use it's different. Yeah, and I think there's some government subsidy
There
towards
is.
which was now close to being
Pulled away, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
There
But
was a
now-
big fuss about that.
Yeah,
in
so the
press.
whole data center industry needed to kind of stand up and say that, hey, do you understand what you're doing? And apparently it seemed like probably they didn't know what they were doing, and now they pull it back, and it's
But
now the subsidies there.
by
So that's what I mean.
comparison of
Yeah.
somewhere like Africa to Finland, I mean, Finland's fascinating because there's a current rush towards Finland because of the low power costs, but the government is enabling stuff. The access to land, power, the support with technical services, the fact that you're even based here in Nairobi illustrates that pushing technical skills out into the markets, and it's not just capital, it's skill sets. And Finland's got a good history of building big projects as well up there. And you also have to think about labor, training, all sorts of logistics. Now, I think some of these out in the middle of nowhere data centers, Google's bought a load of land up really at the top of the Baltic there. Yeah. And whilst there is some fiber up there, there's going to need to be more. Perhaps more grid infrastructure and things like that. So there's a lot of factors going in. But I think the single most important thing is the government supporting the development, speed to market, ease of doing business. I think that's absolutely critical, thinking about those sort of things.
I'm just getting some statistics here from the producer. And in Finland, the data centers are paying for like grade 2 electricity tax, which is it's with all the taxes and everything. Can you help me figure out what is the actual price?
The tax is very small to the data centers. It's 0.06, whereas consumers is 2.25. There is absolutely no tax at all for the data centers.
But do you know the final price?
The final price is
for data centers?
Well, it depends on what they negotiate, but it's low.
Yeah.
It's low.
It's lower.
Yeah, and that's a good rate.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
and so that's a factor. These power hungry GPUs, where the things can be batch processed. You've also got a cool environment, access to free air cooling, access to people, engineering, ease of getting permits is absolutely crucial. And, the risk of the stability of the government. You look at some African countries, digital taxes. You've seen, Uganda, for example, and they put a digital service tax on, Facebook and messaging and stuff like that. And you kind of go, well, that's going to cost people money. It's just an alternative tax. But people making those decisions, they're saying, how stable is this? Is the government going to flip and then chuck a ridiculous tax, which completely blows up my business model?
Exactly.
And things like that. So there's a whole load of stuff, geopolitics, the whole works.
Yeah. So what's your message to those governments who are at the moment considering putting internet tax or a social media tax on their citizens?
I would say,
and at the same time are hoping for investments in their country.
Yeah, exactly. And look, low tax environments. You need money to run a country. Yeah, and there's a lot of fuss here, obviously, about how the government is using that money. Buying flash cars or something. And I think realistically, the message I've always said is don't tax the infrastructure. The infrastructure is the building blocks for everything. But when you get up to a service economy, that's a different story, I think, because you can't have a service economy if you don't have the infrastructure. Yeah. And I very famously said this about the Tanzanian, he passed away, about the Tanzanian president who fired the the Minister of Communications because he wasn't collecting enough tax on infrastructure. This was years ago. And I sat on a paddle and did that. And someone stood up and started shouting at me, which was quite entertaining. But yeah, but
truth hurts.
Yeah, and it was complete left field. But I thought they'd come to get me for a moment there. But that's the reality of it. I mean, infrastructure is critical. Look, if you don't have roads, how can you get? And you're in an agricultural market. How do you get your food to market?
Yeah. So, what role should governments play to encourage and not stand in the way in the growth of digital infrastructure and the building of digital infrastructure?
Yeah, clear rules. Submarine cables. I built submarine cables around the place, but I've seen governments that have got websites with this is how you get a license, a permit. This is the application form. These are the costs, and then you go and do it. And this is in Africa. And then they've got one rule for one company and a different rule for a different company. And it depends on who you're friends with, that sort of thing.
And the agent layers.
Yeah. I mean, facilitating in terms of show me how to get those permits. Stable regulatory environments. It doesn't have to be complicated, but, for example, in South Africa, building the environmental permits for submarine cables, they take about 2 years, but it's known they take about 2 years. That is something people can deal with. And it's a process, very clear, and it's a logical process. It's not, it's a lot of work, but it's there for a reason.
Yeah, I guess it's a different ballgame if you're being told that this takes 2 weeks and it ends up taking 2 years, and then it messes up the whole project, I guess.
Yeah, and then clarity about tax rules. For example, you're going to build a data center, and then what are you going to do? Charge a massive tax on all these processes coming in. That's still infrastructure. If you want the processes to come here, you've got to make it there. And actually, I think governments also, contrary to all of this, they need to look back and look at what does this infrastructure actually bring to my country to actually develop the country? So whether it's skills leading to entrepreneurs, leading to new businesses which feed back and they make money that way, it's what are the important things? And I think trained labor is a big factor in Africa, because a lot of people get trained up and they get educated, they work for companies for a little while, but their eye is on running away and going and working in America or something like that. And you've got to make that environment better for good skilled people to stay in the countries.
I'm curious. I think the currency risk is something actually also that's coming up more and more. Of course, I've heard about it, for a long time in different sectors as well that are trying to that are growing in Africa. But it seems like this year also that's something that's been discussed about more in terms of data centers and from the demand side. So, and also investing in data centers. Topic 4, African solutions. So
You're ahead of me there, actually, because I was thinking one of the things is about supply chains. That dollar thing is driven by overseas supply chains.
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity for newer industries within Africa and manufacturing in Africa? You've got companies that supply loads of gear, Master Power and things like this, which, I don't know the percentage of equipment that they supply, which is totally 100% sourced locally, because nothing in the world ever is.
Yeah.
But looking at those supply chains, I do an agency for an Egyptian company that does transformers, and these big transformers are critical for time to market. Yeah. And it's taking a long time. Whereas these guys have got a quality product, they're supplying directly to one of the hyperscalers, and yet they can supply them in a much lower timescale than some of the other manufacturers and the big brand names that we all know and love.
Yeah.
So those opportunities in Africa. I've always felt. I'm passionate about Africa in that sense, that I just kind of go. I sit around and go, why you look at countries like China who've moved from low-cost labor to high-tech manufacturing and things like that. And then you compare it to the US, where they're trying to onshore a whole load of manufacturing, and they're nowhere in terms of the use of robotics and the skill sets, the labor laws. It's absolutely bizarre. In the land of the free, America, it's much tougher to actually have a solid manufacturing process. But I've often wondered why in Africa, I mean, there was, like in Nigeria, I believe there was a computer manufacturer at one time, why there is not scale manufacturing and skilling up for these things. And again, that comes back to government enablement of these sort of things, I think. It's easier to buy stuff and the scale of the demand in the markets. But that's a strategy for a continent which is perhaps out of scope for this.
Well, it's fine. As I mentioned at the beginning, we can take some sideways if we wish. But one explanation I've been told when I've been wondering about the same thing, why there's so little manufacturing in the continent, is that it benefits someone. Because those people who import, they if the same product would be manufactured in the country, they would go out of business. So
yeah, I mean, they don't have to be vertically integrated companies. I'm not suggesting that, but also not forgetting that supply chains also come with financing. There's a cable from Angola. Cables have a cable from Angola to Brazil, and that was Japanese financing. But they went with the Japanese supplier, it's foreign trade incentives, Exim banks and all this sort of thing that also have a role to play. But again, you come back to the perception. Again.
So African solution. So whenever I go to LinkedIn, I do see a LinkedIn influencer trying to writing about African digital infrastructure or some other things related to Africa. And in almost every post, they mention Africa needs African solutions, which sounds great, but there's very rarely any concrete examples on what that looks like in practice. So if we think about, let's narrow it down to data centers. How does a kind of African solutions for Africa look like in the data center space?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think there is a bit of the factor about scalability and environment. Of course, you've got your physical factors associated with data centers. And say, is it suited to the market? Is it, and understanding, and that's the same issue anywhere. The market. I'm obviously not talking. It's very unlike me not talking loud enough. So, but in terms of that digital infrastructure, there's got to be a lot on skills. I mean, the focus on local skills, again, coming back into an African solution has to be very important. And there's a lot of effort, I mean, obviously in South Africa, it's mandated by law about a certain proportion of your investors and your people. Yeah. And, but I honestly, it's actually realistically talking about your supply chain of skills and things like that, and actually having that opportunity. I mean, Sneha, who's the CEO of IX Africa, and I sound like I'm waving their flag, but I'm talking about an individual. He's involved in, supporting talent and things like that. And that's outside of his business directly. But that feeds into the digital infrastructure industry. This program that you guys have set up that I'm mentoring on, that's actually about bringing skills and helping them to do it themselves. And this is a lot of the capitals are not here. there are, there's a lot of money here, but in terms of some of the funds, looking around the world, and now with what's happened with US aid and factors like that, we have to think of different solutions and local solutions. It's nice that the European Union is helping out, but it is also local solutions, again, coming from governments. And what governments, as we said earlier on, they can make it easier by smoothing that pathway on the ease of doing business through regulatory clarity and removing blocks in the road for people to do stuff. And then more local innovation will happen, I believe.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of where a local approach worked better than an imported one? We've talked about M-Pesa a lot on this podcast, so we know the mobile money thing, which...
See, that's not fair, because that was the one I would have used. No, I mean, M-Pesa was a couple of fellas from South Africa, came up to Kenya, tried to sell it to the banks, banks weren't interested. So they did it themselves, and they did it with Safaricom and Vodafone. And that was essential, because it was a solution to specific problems in the market. Was the fact that a lot of people don't have bank accounts. How do you pay them? Like in Nigeria, there's a phrase, put it on the slate, which literally meant there was a slate, and they'd write down on the slate the amount of debt that was happening. With telecommunications, you can then communicate that slate across the country. So in a different market, you can move that debt or that money or something like that. That's a great example. Some of the projects we're looking at, and talking about agriculture. Yeah, agriculture is still hugely important in Africa and for the world. Yeah. It's not just for Africa, but as a market, the helping products get to market by either producing the right type of seed for a given environment, we could go into the genetic modification, but it's essential in some cases. But also taking that digital technology to match the product production to the demand markets where people are wanting to buy it. So there's no tech really involved in a lot of agriculture, and everybody talks about it a lot, but it's actually about supporting that within the country. And I think the governments have a massive role to play in supporting local entrepreneurs to do that. Yeah. So digital infrastructure is critical to all of that.
Exactly. Like going back to the M-Pesa story, and one of the guests I had here, Dan Quach, yesterday, and he was telling like practically what it meant to him to have M-Pesa. He was studying.
Well, he's Kenyan.
He's Kenyan. He lived here. He was studying at the time. I guess maybe in Nairobi, and his family were somewhere else. And every time he ran out of money, like he needed to call up his parents from probably some kind of call center and ask them to send money on an envelope. And how the kind of transport process worked was that they put the envelope on the bus or something like that, and then hope that no one opens the envelope and it actually reaches to Nairobi. And so that's how hard it was to just get money from place A to place B. And now after this innovation, you can just click, and that's it.
Yeah, but if you go back to the origins of telecommunications, really, Western Union, companies like that, they were about moving money from one place to the other, but it was based upon telegraph. Yeah, and that's the digital enabler, starting all the way back. Yeah. But it's the latest technology which make it a lot easier, but coupled with user interface. Yeah. You look at WhatsApp, and it fascinates me. I've always joked that I say Italy is really in Africa. Sometimes I live in Italy a bit. So, but one of the things is the way that WhatsApp's used. Now, we use our thumbs to communicate, but a lot of the messages sent in Africa, because of language, because of education, because of ease of use, are voice messages on WhatsApp. So they record the voice message. Maybe the quality of connectivity is an issue, but they record the voice message, and that's how it's communicated.
And that's the same thing in Italy. Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I know it was in Italy. They do that a lot down there. I'm sure there are other examples and things like that.
Does that impact or have an influence on the digital infrastructure that has to be built, on the way how people use internet like that, or is it the same infrastructure, or does it have an impact on software or services or anything?
Well, you come down to the long tail in countries for communication and things like that, because one of the things people think about in Africa, you've got these mega cities like Lagos, Cairo, for example. But on the whole, population density is pretty low across the continent. There's big spaces with, you fly over Congo or the middle of Africa, and you look down from the plane and go, oh, there's a forest. Oh, there's a village. Fall asleep for a while. Oh, there's another village. But it's like forest and village or something like that. But overall, they're separated, and the challenges of infrastructure between these locations is still a big thing. Complementary technologies are necessary. I'm thinking everyone, my whole career, because I built submarine cables, would be saying, oh, doesn't that all go on satellite? And now that Starlink exists, people are saying, well, can't these new satellite systems get rid of fiber? And
Can it?
the scale isn't there. But it's a useful complementary technology to reach places where, if you've got a low population density, building fiber is a challenge to go there, unless it's on a pass-through route where you're building between two mega places, two large cities. Building that fiber just directly to get to a village in the middle of nowhere, it's expensive, and you've got to amortize it against the population, more or less. And so satellite does have a fantastic use. And again, you come back to how it's regulated, how it's used, because you do want infrastructure like fiber in your country to move the mass data around. 5G towers, as the utilization goes up, you need fiber to the tower. I can remember years ago talking to people in Hong Kong, and they said they needed fiber to the towers, and Europe was still using little microwave links to the towers but it's the density of population in Hong Kong is a totally different story. Getting all the way into the countryside, satellite is a fantastic backhaul solution. Starlink and Kuiper, love them or hate them, but the point is that let's talk about the technology, not the ownership, but and how it's priced or anything like that. But it offers a useful backhaul. Maybe you can use those things to go down to a village, but actually have a passive optical network or a wireless network, a radio network. Then people are all online, and these are complementary things that support the likes of mobile companies and things like that. And these are challenges. I mean, Vodacom were always coming to me at Google and saying, we want to build fiber to villages, and can you help at Google? And I said, well, my job is to build a production network. This is going to regional hubs where the ISPs pick up the traffic and they plug into those regional hubs, and that is the distribution network to the end users. And take a country like South Africa where development's pretty good, but they've got that problem too, low population density out in the middle of nowhere. And, building 1,000 kilometers of fiber to reach, 5 people, those 5 people have effectively got to pay for that. And if governments are spending their money on doing that for those 5 people, that's kind of a little bit biased, and they're missing the real issue. So I think satellite has a very important place to play. Sadly, Google had a project called Loon, these balloons.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And it was great technology, but the complexity of it navigate. It was going to come here to Kenya, and they were well advanced on it. But the regulatory environment, or the Civil Aviation Authority would say, "Oh no, our planes are going to land, crash into balloons, so you can't do it." Or maybe but this was something they sold to the mobile operators as a floating base station, basically, But it was a solution for low density. But these new satellite constellations, they substitute that. And so it's great. It's how things move along.
So let's speak about what's behind all this energy. Like, how do you power all these things? Sometimes the elephant in the room. How can Africa's data center industry realistically tackle the challenge of reliable and sustainable power?
Wow.
I know, Africa's still 53 or 54 countries.
It's totally different where you go. You go to Angola, perhaps some of the cheapest power in Africa, I think. Someone talking about Uganda the other day, and and here, this is geothermal, but I think there's still a lot of issues about the stories of what they're going to build there, in terms of the availability, the off-takers, because you've got the supply of energy, you've got the grid, the reliability of the grid is a big factor, and these are all multiple industries, production, distribution, local distribution, once you get into a metro area, and things like that. I think large-scale data centers, if they're closer to the bigger grid, it's tended to be more reliable. I could talk about Nigeria in Lagos. Main One went and put a high voltage link in. They built it themselves because they were slightly out of town in Lekki. And the CEO even, she was very skeptical about it, but her engineer was saying, no, this will be better. And I think they got something like 80% uptime on grid alone. So they were burning far less diesel. So their economics was a lot better.
So pessimism versus optimism. Looking ahead, what makes you most worried about Africa's digital future?
I think that's a hard one, because I tend to think more on the optimistic side and think that the pessimistic parts
go to the dark side.
Tend to be the shorter term things than the longer term things. I think intrinsically that governments and demand sets worry me. Yeah. Governments, because they talk the talk, but they change. Governments change frequently. And, we've got this policy. Well, the minister's changed. So we can't actually understand what the policy is now. And that slows stuff down. People are good at navigating that. We've seen, fantastic progress all the way across the continent in many, many different countries. But it does worry me. I did a link with Liquid Telecom between Mombasa, up through Nairobi, through Uganda, through Rwanda, through DRC, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and then down into South Africa. And the complexities along the way, whether it would be a contract, you had to have individual contracts maybe for Zambia, rather than having a single through contract because of the way their VAT worked and things like that. The issues surrounding the terrain, powering line systems along the way. Think about it, and then permits, because you needed to build some new fibre. And that's not going to be the most reliable route. It's a crazy long route, and we were using 3 parallel routes of fibre to get the availability of 1 in some parts of it and things like that. And I think, ensuring that the quality of network build and data center build is kept high is critical, because it's a difference between capital spend at the beginning and an operational cost of fixing it as you're going along. And if you're fixing it as you're going along, you have that big problem about availability. And at the end of the day, you want reliability. So availability, reliability of network is critical.
So the reason for pessimism is really on the kind of regulatory and unpredictable regulatory environment side.
Yeah, but I believe we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this.
That was just a pessimism.
If we didn't believe that eventually these problems can be overcome.
Yeah, the reason for this sequence is actually that I felt like in the first episode I was overly optimistic, so I want a balance now. Okay. So let's head to the optimism. So what makes you the most optimistic?
Like many markets, there's always, if you're later to the game, there's always the opportunity to, jump a step. Technology's improved, methodologies have improved, and things like that. So, learning. I am seeing. You see, there's great people here, like every country. There are great people, and they're looking at these real problems. Everything I've talked about. There's people looking at every single one of those. And the fact that there is focus on the continent, I think it does move things along. And even that demand set, like we're here now. I see computers over there, some mobile phones over there, and all this stuff. And, having that networking stuff of availability. When I first came to Google, working in Africa, sort of like 2012 this was, there were some submarine cables. But Google had into Lagos, a single STM4, which is 622 megabits, going for the country and the region on a single path. The servers were in a cupboard type data center. And I could show you photos of it back in the day.
Cooled by they were
cool,
normal air conditioner.
A regular air conditioner like you've got in this room. I'd say this would probably be a higher standard in availability. This
is integrated.
Yeah. And then more often than not powered by diesel gensets, and the reliability of those gensets was questionable. But we've moved on. Even that site's improved, over time. It's been sold and things like that. But I've got 10 gigabit to my flat in Zurich. I've got a 10 gigabit internet service. Now, I can't use 10 gigabits, but that's the standard. Yeah. So they started at 10 gigabits. And, from that perspective, we look here and the mobile networks have transformed. That's enabled entrepreneurism, which is driving all of this activity, this business activity. Because you've got to start off at the end users and actually say, all right, there are the businesses, they're digitizing, they're working in different ways, they can use cloud services, they don't have to build the infrastructure themselves, and it's here now. Yeah, no, it's not a cloud zone necessarily, but these services are here, and it makes doing business easier. You don't have to invest in a pile of servers, and you can debate whether the cost of cloud versus your own servers, but it's distracting you from your core business is the cloud argument. But just that growth is supporting the growth in the economies and the change, which is then driving the need for more and more digital infrastructure. And it's coming and it's happening. I left Google and, going from buying 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit services with a whole submarine cable. We built Equiano, and there is more. That is change. That's massive change. Yeah, and the impacts of it are still yet to be fully unfurled.
Exactly. So we definitely see a lot of movement already, and it's not like somewhere in the distant future. Things are happening now. So word association, we're getting close to the end. So do you know the concept? I'll say a word and you respond with a word. You can have two. We have nice rules here, the best rules.
Okay.
So
I'll probably use 10 when I can use one.
No, yeah, only two. I'll use yours. Okay.
We'll give it a go, and you correct me if I'm doing it the wrong way.
Hyperscalers.
Not the only market, if I can say that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Politics.
Solvable.
3 lions.
Football.
Digital divide.
Disappearing.
Home.
The world.
Local content.
I'd say global content.
Switzerland.
My guitars are there.
Regulation.
Solvable.
The Clash.
London's burning.
Green energy.
Essential.
Okay. Final question.
How did I do that? I don't.
You did well. You did well. You did well. It wasn't a quiz. It was just So we'll see. We might use that on our social media stuff. Anyway, last question, Chris. Why should we care about African data centers?
I think if you look on a global context, and the opportunities for business is still global. All this Trump rubbish that's going on at the moment about putting up barriers and tariffs and walls, and that's just politics. And yes, there's a bit of the world heading into that in that direction, but it'll have to come back, because in different parts of the world, you've got different environments where it's better to produce something. Whether that's knowledge, as we've seen, energy has an impact, but human skills, manufacturing, food, we're always going to need food. And I actually see the digital infrastructure is critical to support that global view of everything. Now, politicians only really look nationally. It's their job to look after their community. That's why they're hired, to look after their community. So it's a bit inward looking. But actually, if they look at how do I enable for the long term, and that as providing that digital platform, making it ease of use. They don't have to pay for it all, but the thing is making that happen, and then that unlocks the opportunities, whether it's related to global trade, because this place is better at producing something than that place, or raw materials are here and things like that, associating those things. So I'm not arguing the anti-tariffs argument there, but I'm just saying digital infrastructure is a massive enablement of, it makes things available without having to worry about distance, geography, even language now. There are phones you can talk to, and they'll directly. I could be speaking Finnish by using the phone as the interpreter, and that's a big use of a lot of the AI that's starting to get better and better and better. Yeah, so digital infrastructure is critical to all of that.
Thank you, Chris. It was amazing having you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great.
This podcast is part of the Data Governance in Africa initiative, helping the African Union shape data policies, enable cross-border data flows, and build secure, sustainable digital infrastructure. Funded by the EU and 5 member states, it supports a unified digital market in Africa.